When things are wide open, they're going to rock. And when things are really stressful, they're going to dial it back. And they're aware that that's okay, that they can do less instead of quitting. Most people come in from diet world with like 100% everything perfect or 0% I quit. And once people get that they can modulate and give as much as they've got, and that's enough, then they're like that opens up a whole world of them getting just a lot more consistent practice.
The reason why I wanted to have you on is because obviously I got to your page somehow and really got to start looking at some of the things you post. I really loved your approach on skill eating and how that is so interrelated to finding and getting good progress, especially when it comes to getting lean, losing fat, getting results in the gym, being consistent, and transforming your body, but also your mindset and your approach towards dieting. So I think
Yeah.
it is really good that I was able to talk to you and just wanted to bring you to this episode to basically cover everything that you have written in a book you recently published. Was that last year or it's been already a few years?
I think it's actually two years now.
Well, let's get started. So the
Okay.
main thing I wanted to ask you to begin with, apart from thanking you from coming on to this podcast, is what is tell me a little bit about your background, why you do what you do, what you chose, this kind of area of nutrition and psychology, and let's go from there.
Okay. So I've been a personal trainer since 2004. And the clients that I always got have always been weight loss clients. I always got clients that wanted to lose weight. And it was really clear initially that the kind of like common advice kinds of things worked for a small group of clients and not for everyone. I started off working with a big box gym that would provide meal plans to clients that were created by an RD. And we'd give people these meal plans. We'd have them track their calories, and that worked for a small amount of people, right? But I always thought there was a bigger group of people that just weren't able to do it consistently, right? And then also there was this middle group that was able to do it, but it was miserable, where it just became really tedious. And what's hard is like that middle group like put in so much work, but it just kept getting harder and harder and harder. And so I was looking for how do we create something more sustainable? How do I create something that works for more people? And that's when I started getting into habit-based coaching, was what we're calling it at the time. And that put me in touch with some people who like had a psychology background and were explaining to me certain parts of it there. And that got me looking into psychology research, and that got me going to school. And that's kind of like the short version of how I ended up here. It's the stuff that I was doing wasn't working for a lot of people.
Okay.
And especially people that like stress ate or emotionally ate or would eat to procrastinate. Like, just there are a lot of people that most people eat for a lot of like non-hunger reasons, and I didn't have tools for that. So that's what got me starting psychology, and that's what got me studying specifically contextual behavioral science as it relates to like emotional eating and stress eating and things like that.
That's awesome. So looking at the book you recently published around 2 years ago, part of it that really engaged and grabbed my attention, and is that you always make eating skills the number one priority. What are eating skills for you? What's the meaning of eating skills, and why is it the number one priority?
So eating skills, I came to that as like a terminology when I realized that like the habit-based approach wasn't quite right. Like when I was saying habits, like that didn't quite match what we were doing. Like what we're doing is more like learning to drive or learning to play guitar or learning to study a martial art or something like that. Like it's very clearly a skill, and more so than like creating a habit of like brushing your teeth. right? That's not, like there isn't a lot of skill development there. And what I found was the more I started explaining it and relating it like skill learning, the better people were doing. Like if someone's learning to play guitar, they have an understanding like, oh, okay, I'm going to miss some notes sometimes, right? Like I'm not going to be perfect right when I start. Oh, you know what? I can practice 3 days a week and get better, or I can practice 7 days a week and get better, but I don't actually like lose my practice if I skip a day. And so skills as a metaphor for what we're doing just seem to be a better fit. And then when I say eating skills, what I mean is actually two different things. One is kind of like an umbrella term for like guidelines, which a guideline might be something like, I'm going to pause 10 minutes before snacking. That you would pair it with like a skill, which would be like, oh, like if I want the snack, I'm going to check in with my stomach and see like, am I hungry? Am I full? Am I stressed out? Am I bored? Like I'm going to check in and see what's going on here. And so there are also these like two pieces of guidelines and skills that I throw into that umbrella term a lot of times for ease of use. And in terms of it being the number one priority, I just mean that it's a bigger priority than the content of the food. It's a bigger priority than like tracking calories. And it's not to say that the content of the food doesn't matter. And it's not to say that like total energy intake doesn't matter. Of course it does. It's just that in my experience, or at least with my clients, if they can get a better handle on being able to check in with themselves, knowing how to make decisions in different situations, they can choose the more nutritionally dense, like lower energy, like if they can make that choice, then figuring out what that choice isn't super hard.
Okay, got it. Now, when you refer to eating skills, you mentioned also that there are sort of 4 kinds of eating skills. So
yeah,
when you're eating your meal and when you're like during your meals, listening to your body during meals, there are like sort of certain guidelines that you follow. And also when it comes to between meals, whether you're listening to your body and you're following these sort of between meal guidelines. So according to you, why are these important in the first place?
So what I'm looking at there is like, so there's two separate things. There's guidelines and skills, and guidelines are kind of like training wheels for learning how to check in. It's I'm going to put the fork down between bites to slow myself down during a meal, or it's I'm going to eat a balanced meal because that makes it easier to notice when I'm full. And so that like there's the guideline side that makes it easier, and then there's the skills, which is the actual checking with my stomach and seeing like, am I getting full? Is it time to stop? Should I stop now? And so there's that distinction. So you're like, hey, do I want to work more on checking in, or like is checking in really hard for me and I need to add in some guidelines to make it easier? Do I need to add in like kind of like some training wheels? And then the other split is during meals versus between meals. And this is one of those things where usually people show up to me thinking that they need to work on their meals. And sometimes that's the case, but a lot of times what we really need to work on is between meals. We need to work on the snacking when they're bored, when they're procrastinating, when they're tired. And so there's also that split, which is just a way of looking at like, do I need to work on my meals or do I need to work on my snacks? And from that matrix of those 4 different boxes, we can figure out what to put in.
Right. Sounds like a good way to think about not just the eating component of it, but also like checking in and how is your relationship with food? What are your thoughts? What are your feelings when you're eating? And also like, what do you do when you're not eating?
Yeah.
How are you managing your psychology, your mindset, your habits, your choices, not just when you eat, but also when you're not necessarily having a meal, but like, again, it's like that in between main meals is like you're doing at that point in time.
Yeah. So like an example for the people listening, let's say that your lunch, you're working on eating a balanced-ish meal, and you're also working on stopping when full. And so you're putting together your plate with, you've got like your vegetables, your protein, your carbohydrates, a little bit of fat. And so like, that's your guideline for like plating like that. And then as you're eating, you're actually going to start checking in like halfway to the meal, to the end of the meal. You're like, oh, like, how am I doing? Like, am I getting full? Does this look like enough? Like, I looked at my meal to begin with. Did that look like it'd probably be enough? And then you actually play the game of stopping when full. Like, you're like, okay, I think that actually was enough. I think I'm going to stop and see how it goes. And then you might have like another guideline, which is like, I'm going to eat a balanced meal like this every 4 to 6 hours, and probably not like I'm not going to have a snack in between without checking in. And so then if you feel like you want some food 3 hours later, you're like, oh, I'm going to check in and see like, okay, what's going on? Okay, my boss just yelled at me. So that probably means that it might not be hunger. I might just be like trying to avoid that. Check in with my stomach. Actually, I don't feel anything. Okay, that's not hunger. I'm going to move on. Or it could be like, oh, you know what? Like I've got an empty feeling in my stomach. I feel really hungry. And then you'd actually go eat, and you'd also notice, hey, you know what? That meal I plated last time wasn't enough. Like it either wasn't balanced enough or it wasn't enough food. But like for me to be legitimately hungry, like a couple, 2 or 3 hours after eating, that means it was probably too small. And maybe like previous diets taught me to eat meals that were too small. And so that's how both between meals and during meals work together as a system.
Yeah. Okay. The other point I really liked about reading your book was a part when you look at if then is/then planning, which is kind of a very important meta skill for behavior change. And it seems like it is even more important than actual goal setting, because if you know what to expect, or like you foresee specific obstacles or challenges or barriers, you're able to know or kind of predict what might happen and how you would react to it and have a plan after it. So I really like the way that you sort of phrase it. If sort of this obstacle shows up, then what am I going to do to overcome it? And why did you come up with this, or like you brought this science and kind of to make it a little bit more reflecting on this particular point? Why do you find that even obstacle planning is more important than actual goal setting?
It just showed up as being really effective in the research. Like looking at goal achievement research, it's obstacle planning like this is looked like about the most important thing I could find. Right. And I only found one study that compared it to goal setting, and it was, and like if you broke them out as components, then obstacle planning was actually more effective than goal setting. And so I thought that was cool. And in my experience working with clients, the issue with goal setting around weight, right, like around setting a weight loss goal, is that mostly, well, I mean, to make it kind of circular, like setting the goal actually doesn't necessarily do anything in the world of like skill development or their ability to overcome the obstacles that they're going to get to, right? So like they may say like, hey, I want to lose this much weight, but they've never had like really consistent weight loss before that was in a healthy way, that matched their values, that fit into their lives. So it's one of those things where the goal can actually get in the way, where they can start to make choices that don't align with their values because they want to hit this goal. So they might I had a client once that one of the most important things with her actually ended up being pizza night with her kids. And actually, when she put in eating pizza with her kids on Tuesday nights or whatever it was, then that actually like pulled the whole week together for her, because it was so important to her to bond with her kids like that. And like if she was just thinking about this goal, she might cut that out. Like outcome goals can get in the way, especially if you don't already have all of the skills that you need. And clients aren't usually hiring me already possessing all of the skills, because they wouldn't hire me. So obstacle planning then ends up being a matter of, let's actually take a look at, like, we actually know a lot of the things that are going to come up and get in the way, right? If clients step back and they think about it, the things that got in their way last week are probably going to come up again next week or the week after, and we can make plans for that. And the really interesting thing about this is that it doesn't even matter if they follow the exact plan that they came up with. Just by virtue of the fact that they thought through that they might hit that obstacle, they're better prepared. Like I'd say at least half the time when they get to that obstacle, they're like, you know what, I had this plan, but actually this would work better, and they're fine. But there's sort of this, like, if you don't step back an obstacle plan, there's sort of this assumption that everything's going to go well. And real life just doesn't work like that. And so obstacle planning ends up becoming the meta skill or the foundation for essentially getting past all the things that held them back in the past. And one other thing that I'd throw out about that is that there are two ways that we can go with obstacle planning. One is logistics. Like, hey, you know what? Thursday is always a really long day for me. Like I have to work here and I have to do this thing for my kids, whatever. And so I need to figure out like, what am I going to eat in that gap where I can't cook? Like I have to eat something out or whatever. Right. And they actually make a choice about what to like go eat or what to bring with them. And that kind of obstacle planning is really cool. The other kind of obstacle planning is planning for emotions, stress, tiredness, that kind of thing doesn't always necessarily have a logistical solution. It's just a matter of saying, you know what, Friday I've got this project due and I know I'm going to want to eat to procrastinate, or I know I'm going to want to eat to avoid the stress. And I need to plan, I need to expect to have that feeling so that I can let that feeling show up without me having to eat to numb it.
That is great. And I think it is really, really important, but it's also very hard because there is a lot of like, you don't really, like a normal person that is lacking with that self-awareness of how they actually respond to certain things or bring that into the consciousness. It's really hard for them to think, oh, you know what, if I am doing this, I'm going to feel this way. And if I feel this way, I need to plan for it. So that's why I find that coaching is bringing that extra perspective on, like, look, try to reflect on what has gone wrong in the past, and what are the points, the tipping points that are actually affecting your adherence or your consistency. That is not necessarily, oh, I have this big goal, which is great, but it's not necessarily leading you anyway to any place, because it is not necessarily giving you like insights in what has been the points of that journey that are not necessarily aligned with your goals, or what is affecting your adherence or your consistency. And generally it's just life happening and things in the way, and just learning how to deal with them in an effective way, but reflective way as well, understanding, this is happening, but why is this happening? Or if this is happening just because it happens, how am I responding to it? Am I preparing for it? Am I expecting it? Or am I expecting for this to be recurrent? Because there are certain things that you might expect for it to happen regularly or potentially happen the next time. But there are times that things come up unexpectedly, like you got sick or you have to travel because of work. How do you plan for it? And how do you respond to this unexpected, that sometimes these unexpected things can actually be very, very triggering or harder to deal with when you're in already, you have your mindset, you have your plan, and things go completely all the way and stress you out. So when it comes to dealing with these unexpected things coming out, what would you recommend? What are some of the strategies that you put in place with skill eating and like obstacle planning when things are unexpected, when you're not expecting it, but you somehow are able to plan and get away from it?
That's a great question. So like you're saying, people don't always come in with that kind of self-reflectiveness about this. And in coaching, we actually like prompt them to have that. We prompt like what happened there? What were you feeling? What were you thinking? And then we obstacle plan, we can put that back in. We can say like, okay, what do you expect to be feeling? What do you expect to be thinking? What do you expect the situation to be? And we're in a way, when we're obstacle planning, we're practicing in kind of like a controlled environment. We're practicing for the obstacles that we know will come up, but we're also developing that skill of them checking in, such that when they end up in a situation that they haven't planned for, they have sort of like this, they actually have the skill of going like, oh, wow, what am I feeling right now? What am I thinking? Okay, what's the situation I'm in? I'm in this situation. Have I been in other situations that I've planned for where maybe I can like pull one of those plans out of my back pocket and use it? And so like maybe you've got someone that, like we're talking about, like, so the example of they've got like a really busy Thursday. They've got like a really busy Thursday and it's a super busy day and they have to get like all their meals out. And actually the only thing that they can do on that day is they've got like 2 meals where they can put the fork down and bites and slow down and stop when they're full. And then they've got 1 meal that they've got to eat that's really fast, because they only have this short break. They have to eat that really fast, but they're gonna portion it as well as they can and then eat it and then go on to the next thing. And like that's their plan for Thursday. And when they have to travel for work then, and they're like, what do I do? They're like, you know what? I can do something kind of like what I did on Thursday. I've got this meal that I've got to catch before the plane, and I have to eat it fast. But even though it's fast, I'm going to make it balanced. Okay, I can do that. And then I've got this other meal where I've got to eat with clients, and I can't control what it is, but I can put the fork down in bites, and I can notice when I'm full and stop. And so they can, the more experience they get making obstacle plans for things that they can foresee, the better they actually do when they hit an obstacle that they haven't foreseen. Because they already know how to like scale back the amount of guidelines they're working on, or like change the guidelines, like maybe they're working on a totally different thing, but like on that trip, they can only do that one skill. And the same thing when, there's an emergency at work or their kids get sick or whatever, they've built like their own library of ways to overcome obstacles, and also their own way, like their own skill of like checking in and making those kinds of decisions. And that's another thing that's actually really key, is that unlike diets where you've got one set of rules for every situation, in this case, we look at skills like tools, like we put them in to make it easier. And it's okay to do more sometimes and less other times.
I like when you talk about guidelines more than rules, because I think it is very limiting when you have set specific things that you have to do. Like when you look at a dietary restriction, or like you follow a diet that says you have to eliminate these carbs and you have to cut out this and take out that and don't avoid these, it's like it's just giving you so much limitations that it actually doesn't teach you anything, but rather it's just restricting your options to make decisions on your own. Whereas when you you have guidelines, you have more like a range of flexibility that say, well, you should be choosing or try to choose, like when we think about perhaps like protein, try to eat a higher protein meal. It's not telling you have to eat meat like a very high protein or that specific protein source, but like what are some of the protein sources that are available? Okay, what can I include in my plates that will increase the protein? So it's kind of giving you some guidance of how to optimize a situation, or how to better respond to it, or be more like have a much better outcome based on following certain suggestions or recommendations. But I find that it's much more subtle, and it feels like it's no one is telling you what to do, but rather giving you suggestions on where to look and find your way with those suggestions and adapt those to what you stand for or what you like doing.
Yeah, it's like here's a set of tools that can help you make the best choice available.
Yeah.
Right. You aren't stuck with always trying to get the absolute optimal perfect choice. You're able to go, okay, you know what? Here's what I can do in this situation to make the best choice that I've got, either in terms of like towards my goals and towards things I want to do with nutrition and fitness, or even towards like other things that I might value, like connection with my family or even enjoyment, and being able to sort that out on the fly in real time.
What are some of the things, or perhaps how you talk about turning points where you have found that your most successful clients always kind of figure out after being coached for a period of time in regards to practicing their eating skills? So what are some of the things that work well? What are some of the things that cause failure when it comes to success in your nutrition journey, eating skills, being able to be better at managing your nutrition overall?
That's a great question. So the first thing is that people learn to adjust the amount of their skill practice based on how how their week or their day looks. We call it Goldilocksing, right? Like this practice would be too much, this practice would be too little, this practice is just right. Where people get to like, okay, next week is going to be super, super, super stressful. I've got all this stuff happening. I've got, I've got family in town and I've got a project to do and my kids have 2 soccer tournaments or whatever. And they go, you know what? I'm going to dial back my practice to just a couple things, right? Like if they're pretty good at it, they might say like, you know what, next week, I'm not going to worry about what the food is. I'm just going to notice when I'm full and stop. And I'm going to check in with my stomach in the situation before I have a snack. And I'm going to do that, before lunch, like I'm not even gonna worry about dinner. And then they might have like another week where where their schedule's wide open and everything's going well. And they might say, you know what, that week I'm going to plate balanced meals, like 15 meals that week. I'm going to put my fork down between bites. I'm going to check in with my stomach and stop. I'm going to make sure I turn off screens and go to sleep. I mean, like they could stack in a bunch of stuff. Like when things are wide open, they're going to rock. And when things are really stressful, they're going to dial it back. And they're aware that that's okay, that they can do less instead of quitting. Most people come in from diet world with like 100% everything perfect or 0% I quit.
All or nothing.
Totally. And once people get that they can modulate and give as much as they've got, and that's enough, then they're like that opens up a whole world of them getting in just a lot more consistent practice. And with more consistent, like some of these are hard skills. Like learning how to be with emotions without eating them is a hard skill. You need a lot of practice over time. And if people can practice less but stay in it, they just get way, way, way more practice. Another big turning point is self-compassion. And I mean self-compassion in a very specific way. It's kind of like Dr. Kristen Neff talks about self-compassion, there being like nurturing self-compassion and fierce self-compassion. And that nurturing self-compassion like takes care of you in this very like restful kind of way, whereas like fierce self-compassion takes care of you in this very like active, like defensive kind of way. And so we look at self-compassion as being this thing where it isn't letting yourself off the hook. It's actually can I be with my own humanity, and can I be with my own flaws and my own mistakes and everything that I am and everything I'm not, and still do the things that matter to me and still take care of myself. And when people get like, okay, like perfectionism goes one way, and that usually takes me towards failure, and self-compassion goes this other way, and it actually takes me towards like taking care of myself in spite of all the mistakes I make and all the flaws that I have, and actually being a human, then people do really well. And they start making choices that actually take care of themselves, where they actually take care of themselves, where sometimes that might be, you know what, I'm going to dial it back and not practice this week because there's just too much going on. And other times taking care of themselves might actually be like, you know what, I'm going to practice because practicing actually takes care of me.
I agree with that. And I think that what I find that is a little bit challenging is teaching self-compassion in a way to your clients, in a way that it doesn't feel like you're telling them, you know what, just don't worry about it. If you can do it, just don't do it. It's like how much self-compassion is too much, where it becomes like I am being way too flexible. Like, well, I just don't feel like it. I am just being self-compassionate with myself. I'm just not going to do it. It's like, it's like a little fine line between, okay, I'm practicing self-compassion in order to be more consistent, but it doesn't mean like perhaps doing this over and over is okay. It's just like trying to find the right balance when things are not great, but it's not kind of going to the other extreme either. It's kind of saying, well, I don't need necessarily to do 100%, but I can do 70% and still being able to move forward rather than not doing anything and just being okay with that.
Yeah. Okay. So really, really great point, right? There's self-kindness, which is like doing things that are kind and feel good for you. Self-compassion is specifically doing things that matter to you and doing things that take care of you. And like the muffin in the afternoon to numb out feeling stressed out actually isn't taking care of me. Right? Like that actually isn't taking care of me. That actually isn't moving towards what matters to me. That might be self-kindness, but I might look at that and say, you know what, that actually isn't self-compassion. And so that's what I'm talking about, like this really like Kristen Neff calls it a fierce self-compassion, like an active self-compassion, where it's less about, oh, you know what, having chocolate cake is self-compassion. It's more like, you know what, I am a human who gets tired sometimes, and I get sad when bad things happen, and sometimes I feel frustrated, and sometimes I make mistakes. And the reality is, if I can be with that, if I can be with my flaws and my, uncomfortable emotions sometimes, and still do what matters to me, that's like next level self-compassion. So like a lot of times it really comes down to, like, you know what, I feel really, maybe something really frustrating happens and I feel really frustrated. And you know what, like I made a mistake at work, and I'm frustrated, and maybe I look bad even that I made this mistake. Self-compassion is actually going, you know what, like humans make mistakes sometimes. I don't make mistakes all the times, but I made that time, and it does feel bad, and it's normal for that to feel bad. And you know what, like that does suck, and I don't need to eat differently to numb that out. I can actually just be with my mistake there without having to eat some cookies to not feel it. And that kind of self-compassion is the opposite of letting myself off the hook. I'm actually taking care of and you know what? I might go like, you know what? That does suck. And that cookie's not gonna solve it. And you know what? When I get home, I want to give my wife a hug and talk to her about it, because that'll actually help. Or I want to go for a walk with my dog, or like later I might do something that actually takes care of me, but realizing that like having the cookies actually wasn't self-compassion. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. Now, when it comes to bring this concept that I find that it kind of sort of overlaps with what you're talking about, is intuitive eating.
Yeah.
And like, obviously is it the same for you as eating skills? Is obviously intuitive eating is listening to your body cues, understanding and learning about it when it comes to food choices, self-care. But what is intuitive eating as it is? What does that mean? And how does this sort of comes into a play when we think about self-care, self-compassion, improving your relationship with food, listening to your body, what you really need, and trying to learn more about what you want, what you need, in order to find the results you're looking for, but based on what your body is best designed to respond to, without necessarily following these rules, these dieting rules or things like that. Especially if we're talking about someone who struggles with a relationship with food, or just not being in tune with the body in the first place.
Really good question. And I wish I actually hadn't said intuitive eating in the book. There are a couple places where I talked about some intuitive eating research.
Yeah.
And I was looking at a lot of intuitive eating research, because I was just looking at so much research on eating based on hunger and fullness cues, and the relationship between that or I should say the correlation between that and the relationship with your body. But what I'm doing in terms of eating skills is not intuitive eating. It's distinct. The biggest distinction would be that I make allowances for people to intentionally lose weight, which is something that intuitive eating is typically against. So really what I'm looking at in terms of people's relationship to eating and their relationship to their body, we want to build the skills to notice when they're hungry and eat, and notice when they're full and stop. And then also to be able to distinguish the difference between hunger and like other uncomfortable internal sensations, whether thoughts, emotions, or even like non-hunger bodily sensations, even just like being tired. And then a step further in terms of their relationship with their body, how to be with the thoughts that they have and the emotions that they have around their body without that taking them in a direction that's away from their personally chosen values. So what that looks like is a lot of clients that show up will like, let's say they look at themselves in the mirror, or they see a picture of themselves or whatever. They have some thoughts about their body. They have some emotions about their body. and they immediately want to diet really hard, or they want to go eat. Like both of those are like soothing behaviors, like, oh, I'm going to find a new diet and that's going to like make me feel better. Or, oh, I'm going to eat, and that's going to make me feel better. And so what we're looking at there is we're looking at, can they stop and slow down and check in and say like, okay, what am I feeling in my body? Okay, am I feeling hungry? Am I feeling tired? Am I feeling, is my heart starting to race? Like, well, like what's going on? What kind of emotions am I feeling? Okay, actually like I'm actually feeling kind of sad or kind of lonely or kind of angry or frustrated. What thoughts am I having? Okay, I'm having these thoughts that like, wow, I'm having all these thoughts that I had from like diet world, or I'm having these thoughts that like things people said to me in junior high, or I'm having, right? And they start to like notice their thoughts as thoughts. And then they can actually take a step back and look at their values and what matters to them. They can say, you know what, like I'm really working on self-compassion, or I'm really working on reasonableness, or I'm really working on whatever matters, a connection. And they can make a choice that's different. They can take an action that's different from eating or dieting, which would have been the response to those thoughts and feelings they had about their body before. I know that's a big, crazy response. that was a lot of stuff.
I know, but when it comes to specifically skill eating, how do you, because obviously when we are trying to improve our skill set, and when we're making choices about how to eat, when to eat, how fast to eat, tune into our hunger cues, ask ourselves questions, reflect whether we're hungry or whether we are worried or whether we actually emotionally eating. All of these things require reflection, self-reflection, self-awareness, and they are skills. It's something that you just don't do automatically just because it just is automatic for you. It's something that you have to start realizing that it is a skill and you have to develop it and practice. So how do you differentiate the word kind of intuitive eating with the skill eating? Because they're kind of similar when you bring up the point of you with the skills. All of these are skills. Like you just don't intuitively eat and just listen to your body and eat whatever, because you're not necessarily putting into place self-care, or what is truly self-care to you. What does that mean to you? What do you really need to begin with? Is it something that is just a craving? Is it something that you're choosing because you just want it? Or is it something that you're choosing because it is going to be good to you? Sometimes saying yes to certain foods is important, but sometimes saying no is also important too. So it's like, what is that true this balance between these two things? So is it kind of similar, or are they overlapping? It's more like how would you differentiate these two things?
Differentiate between eating skills and intuitive eating?
Yeah.
So the overlap, like the place where they overlap is that they both involve checking in with hunger and fullness and making some of your eating decisions based on that. They also overlap in terms of checking in, like learning to be with emotions and not like eating specifically to numb out your emotions most of the time. And like I said before, the biggest distinction is just that with eating skills, a lot of my clients are looking for intentional weight loss. Like they're actually putting these skills in deliberately to hit move towards weight loss. And that's the thing that I think is totally okay. That's the thing that I let clients do. That's usually why people hire me. They're usually looking to hire me because they want to lose weight without destroying themselves, because they've done diets before that went really badly. And they want to look at like, what would it look like to make these kinds of changes for my values instead of like purely to hit a societal standard of beauty. And so that's a big distinction between eating skills and intuitive eating. There might be some others. I've talked to other people. To tell you the truth, for as much time as I spent looking at research on intuitive eating, I'm actually not super familiar. Like I've skimmed the book and I've skimmed the intuitive eating workbook, but I'm not actually really well versed in that, which is why I said, like, for as much as I look at the research, I actually now I kind of regret having referenced it so much in my book. I didn't reference it a lot, but they're kind of, like, one of the 10 turning points is related to intuitive eating, and some research I read about it. But I'm actually not, like, I developed these eating skills mostly in the world of hunger and fullness based eating.
Okay.
And so it's also a little bit distinct in that it's really set in a contextual behavioral science framework, which means that I put like values at the top. So like the highest level is making decisions based on your values. And so that might be like someone's working on connectedness, and so they care about like connectedness with themselves, they care about connectedness with other people, they're actually making decisions in the moment, like going like, okay, it's actually really connected for me right now. Like I actually feel really connected to myself when I stop when full, or I feel really connected with my friend when I actually have ice cream with them on Sunday, right? Like they're able to make these like really high level decisions that actually may or may not have a lot to do with hunger, right? They might have the ice cream with a friend even when they're not hungry. But then below that is like the hunger and fullness cues, and then below that is the guidelines, which we use to as like an on ramp to learn the skills. Does that answer it? Kind of.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Now, when it comes to thinking a little bit deeper into why are you eating in the first place?
Yeah.
Obviously, is understanding that sometimes you eat because you're actually hungry, and sometimes you eat because you just want to eat, or you're using food as a coping mechanism to escape from something that is uncomfortable, or you're bored, or you're tired, or you're just trying to find some comfort into food. So my question would be, and that's something that I think I read in your book, is like how to really sit down and reflect and being able to distinguish between what true hunger is and when this impulse comes from cravings, tiredness, emotions, thoughts, boredom, sadness. What do you do in this case? How do you distinguish the difference?
Yeah. So so like someone has an urge to eat the chocolate chip cookies, and chocolate chip cookies are my favorite, by the way. They're the best. But so someone has an urge to eat some chocolate chip cookies, and one of the guidelines that they have is pausing 10 minutes before having a snack. So, and that's not like a rule, like maybe they pause for a minute, maybe they pause for 20 minutes or whatever, but they pause. And in that pause, that's where they actually check in. And so if I've got a client who's like brand new to this, they'll pause for the full 10 minutes, and they might actually like sit down with a piece of paper and actually write out like, do I feel a hollow feeling in my stomach? And they'll be like, no. Okay, so I might not be hungry. And they might say like, am I hungry for a complete meal? Or am I hungry just for chocolate chip cookies? And they're like, just chocolate chip cookies. Okay, so that means I'm probably not hungry. And then the next, they might be like, if I wait, does it build or does it fade? And then that would be like a really clear one where they could be like, okay, so I'm not hungry. Do I have it just because I want it, or do it, but it's not hunger. Then they're looking at choosing. And when they're looking at choosing, they might take a look at like who they want to be about food. Like most of my clients want to be someone who can eat dessert sometimes and stop. But there's also like another amount that they don't like they don't. So really clearly, really common, I'll get clients that are like, oh, you know what? I eat these chocolate chip cookies every single day, like every single day. And I feel like I actually don't want to have to eat them every day. I actually want to be able to choose. So they might say like, oh, you know what? I've had chocolate chip cookies 3 days this week. I'm not really depriving myself. I'm probably going to skip it. Like it's not like I'm not having chocolate chip cookies. I have them, and I've had a lot this week. So this time I'm going to skip. Other times I might be like, you know what? I haven't had chocolate chip cookies in a couple of weeks. I'm totally going to have it just because I want it. And so they can make those kinds of decisions where like it isn't like a rule, but they're aware that they don't want to have to eat every single time the urge strikes them. They actually want to be able to choose like, oh, you know what? This it would be really cool to eat it right now. Or, like another situation, like, or to be like clearer would be like, oh, you know what? I'm sad and I want to have the cookies. Now I'm out. I don't want to be the kind of person who eats chocolate chip cookies every time I'm sad. So I'm going to skip it. Or they're like, oh, you know what? My kids just baked chocolate chip cookies, and it like, of course, I'm going to eat the chocolate chip cookies that they just baked for me, because like that's cool, right? And so like those would be two like very clear like values based, like, oh, here I'm not going to have it, or here I'm not going to have it, and here I am going to have it. And that kind of, the funny thing is, if people actually like stop between the urge and the choice and they think about it, they can actually make those decisions. It's just that they're not stopping. You know?
I like that. I like that point of stopping and just pause, analyze and reflect. What is truly like driving or leading you to do that action? Do you want to eat just because you want to satisfy your craving? Is it then kind of reflect on it and say, well, is it worth it if I actually go and eat it? Is it aligned with my goals to begin with? Is it if I eat it, am I going to feel good about it, or am I going to feel guilty, or am I going to feel shame about it? So if I am looking for comfort and feeling good, but then I reflect that the feeling after it is not really going to be positive, then I don't see a point of investing or getting or eating something that is not going to really bring any positive afterwards. But if you just follow your desires and impulses, you probably don't think about that further beyond.
Yeah.
You know, to stop and think, I am actually not going to feel good if I do this.
Yeah.
So that's why it's reflecting and having that power of stopping and pausing for a minute and reflecting and kind of listening to, how am I feeling right now? What am I feeling? Like, what is the feeling I am actually like identifying, emotion labeling, like really understanding why am I sad? And kind of looking back into what's the root of this discomfort? Can I address it and feel better? Is it something that is in my control? Or what happens if it's not in my control? How do I go about it? So when it comes to obviously looking at a situation, there are times that you can control what is outside of that scope or outside of your control. And there are times that you can control what is around you, but sometimes it's just not in your control. So I like when you say in your book, control what you can or accept what you can't.
Yeah.
So what do you do, or how do you go about, if you can elaborate more in the statement of control what you can, accept what you can't?
Well, it kind of comes back to what we were talking about before about like making the best choice available. Like, you don't have to make the best choice that could theoretically be possible in the entire world. If you make the best choice of the choices you've got, that's enough. But like acceptance in general, we're looking at there. I mean, there's just so much, like it's hard in this. There's sort of like a cottage self-help industry around like making you feel like you can control everything. But there's a ton of things that we can't control, right? Like I've got a lot of clients that are managers at their work, right? And have employees, they've got bosses, they've got projects, they've got like a million things that like they can influence some, and some things happen that just they had no control over at all. And we need to be able to get a little bit of perspective on the fact that sometimes stuff just happens. And so it's often a matter of literally doing perspective taking, of again, like pausing for a minute and going like, okay, if my best friend was here, what would they say about what's going on? You know, if one of the employees that you manage like blows up the project that you were supposed to, like, that you were accountable for coming in this week, and it's not going to come in until next week, maybe there's something to learn there. Maybe there's something you could have done differently, but like right then there's nothing you can do. And like, what would a wise mentor say? You know, like, could you get some perspective? Would they say like, hey, you know, maybe you can learn this, or maybe you should have done that, but like, there's nothing you can do now. You could do perspective taking in terms of like, if I look back from next week, how will I see this? You could also do acceptance just in the world of like, that thing happened and it sucks and it feels bad, and it's actually normal to feel bad when things don't go well. That's another one that's like, sometimes I skip over that one because it's like, it sounds really simple, but for the most part, our culture doesn't operate like it's okay to feel bad when bad things happen. there's a lot of things we can't control, and it's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel bad. There's a mythology that if you feel bad, you won't be able to take actions on the things that matter to you. We know that that's not true. We've got tons of research that you can have a bad feeling and still do what matters. So all of that just comes around to like, how can we get some perspective on the fact that sometimes things happen that we didn't want to have happen, and sometimes we have feelings that are uncomfortable, and we can't control all the things that happen. We can't control all the things we feel. Our ability to accept our feelings about that actually really influences our ability to take actions that matter to us given the situation. So if everything blows up and you feel really bad, you can still take a step back and say like, oh, you know what? I can still put the fork down between bites, and I can still stop when full, even though I feel really terrible about this thing that happened the way that it went. It's our inability to accept it that has people eat to numb it out.
Yeah. And I think it is so important to kind of look at the full picture again. It's like, well, this happened, and I'm not going to be able to follow everything that I had planned for this week in order for me to achieve my goal. Let's say you plan for resistance training for the week, 3 or 2 sessions of cardio, to eat 140 grams of protein, and to eat this amount of extra calories during the day, and to do your 10,000 steps. So you have this big plan, but something happens, and let's say you hurt your back. Now you can't train the 4 times a week, but you can still have control on all the things, and you might be able to still do something. It might not be as optimal as you had thought or you had planned, but you can still have control over certain things. And maybe you might not be able to train as hard, but that doesn't mean that you could potentially still get some training in, modify it, and being able to work around the injury and not with the injury. So you can modify certain exercises. And a lot of people, and this is for experience, I find that they get so stuck in, like, if they're following a training program, if they have to do something that is not in there, they feel like they're not doing what they are supposed to be doing. So it's this kind of mentality. Like, I don't know if you've read this book about the tendencies. It's called The 4 Tendencies, and we have personality, different forms of respond to situations in a different way that are sort of aligned with who we are and what we are. So this is a tendency of meeting expectations. So there is that obliger, which this kind of person who is really ready to do what is told to do. They don't ask questions. They just follow the rules. And most of the times is to either do the right thing or please other people. They just don't ask, why am I supposed to be doing this? There is another type of person or this tendency of being upholders, which are, they do what they have to do, but because they just know what is right for them, and they just don't ask questions. If you tell them, well, let's meet at 10 a.m. tomorrow, they are not going to ask questions. They're, okay, I'm going to be there, let's do it. So they're like all ready to go. And it's mostly to meet that expectation. They meet the expectations for themselves, but they also meet expectations for someone else. Then we also have this sort of questioner, and I think I fall into that category. Like, you will do things that are requested to you if that makes sense to you. Otherwise, you start asking questions until you actually find the answer of, why am I supposed to be doing this in the first place? If that doesn't make sense, you won't do it. And then the last one of the 4 tendencies is this sort of rebel. Like, they only will do what they want to do. If you tell them to do something, probably are not going to do it unless it makes sense to them to do it, or because they are going to get something out of it, or they will just do it when they want to do it. I think I also fall into that category. I'm talking between questioner and rebel. It is a very interesting way of seeing how people could be categorized meeting expectations. I think that is from Gretchen Rubin. If you want to look it up, I think it is very
Okay.
interesting to look and read into the four tendencies. I am aware of your time, so I am going to ask you one more question, and this is about some eating tips while on vacation or social eating. How do you stay in control when there is something that is obviously out of your control? You're going to go on vacation. You probably won't be able to prepare your meals on your own, or weigh food or track food is at the point very, very accurately. With social eating, you have that extra social peer pressure, extra food around, drinks, things that you might not be able to control. How do you stay on track, or what are some of the tips that you probably will give your clients?
So it depends a lot. I mean, first off, it all comes back to their own personally chosen values and how they want to approach these things. But like at the most basic level, frequency is a big thing to consider. So if someone is eating socially, once a month, then maybe they aren't concerned what they do at all. If they're eating socially 4 or 5 times a week, then maybe they want to practice all of their skills while they're eating socially. So maybe while they're out socially, they're trying to, maybe while they're at the restaurant, they're trying to order food that is, pretty close to a balanced meal. Maybe they're putting their fork down between bites. Maybe they're noticing when they're full and they're stopping. Maybe they're deliberately limiting alcohol intake, right? Maybe maybe they have like 1 glass of wine or maybe none. But or if someone's eating out 1 or 2 times a week, maybe they pick and choose. Maybe most of the time they're following most of their skills, and some of the meals they aren't. Like maybe they have date night, and they want to split a bottle of wine, and so they're maybe they want to split a bottle of wine and have dessert, and they're looking at kind of like going back to the chocolate chip cookie conversation. Like they don't want to do that 2-3 times a week, but like once a week or every other week, like that, and they get to set their own sort of frequency, but like that matters, and again, like when I say frequency, I don't even mean it as a rule. I don't mean they're setting up like once a week I'm gonna eat all the things and drink all the wine, but they're actually making contextual decisions, so that maybe they have 3 weeks that go by and they don't have date night, and so they don't, and then 1 week they have like date night and they have their friend's birthday, and they want to drink wine at both of those. And so they're able to make that kind of contextual decision, like here it matters to me, and these other times it doesn't. And so they're choosing where they want to put that kind of stuff in. And the same kind of thing with vacation, where if you go on vacation once a decade and this is your first trip to Italy, like eat all the things, like if you're going on vacation, like, I don't, 4 times a year, like if it's a weekend vacation and you're going every month, maybe you want to like put the fork down between bites, and you want to stop when full, but you also like want to eat the different things. You're not as worried about the content of the food, but you're like, I'm also going to not eat past fullness. Those are the kinds of choices you can make depending on how important to you it is, how frequent it is, like that, right? And so the kinds of skills people might put in those situations would be the like putting the fork down in bites, noticing different flavors, enjoying them, stopping when full, some version of like being there and enjoying the food and being aware of when they've had as much as they want to have, right? Because the flip side is, if I'm on vacation, I also don't want to feel over full and like I want to go back and take a nap. I might want to go do the next fun thing,
I agree completely. That makes so much sense. And it is so important to develop these skills in the first place, to being able to acknowledge that frequency could be one very key thing here. Like if you are expected to attend so many social events, because that happens a lot for people that work in certain companies, that they require you to travel a lot or travel often or have lots of social events. How do you go about it? How do you go about saying no if there is something that you probably can say you can't, you just need to be there in those social events, or you have to travel. There's no like, oh, I just don't want to because that's going to mess up with my goals. You kind of need to go along with it. So in that case, how do you plan around it in order to optimize it as much as possible? It probably is not going to be the best, most optimal way to do things. It could be better, but if that is your only situation, how could you optimize it the best way possible? When you think about, all right, let me just look at what are some of the things I can control, what are some of the things I might be able to plan around, and I just utilize these guidelines and sort of give yourself flexibility, but also somehow establish certain rules you want to go by in order for you to stay accountable and consistent on a regular basis.
It's actually a lot like what you were saying about like the workout program. And if you got an injury and like maybe the workout program has these like 4 components and now you can't do one of them, but you can still do the other 3, you do those, right? It's like, that's such a great metaphor because it's the same thing. Like if I'm on a work trip, I can't do all the things, but if I can do 2, I'm going to do those 2.
Correct. All right. I think I am going to let you go because it's been a little bit of over an hour, and I am very appreciative of your time. I thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Awesome. What are some of the future projects you have in mind or you're working in?
So the next big thing is I've got an eating skills program with GMB Fitness, and we're actually releasing a new version. Like we've got like this massive update that's coming available to different folks over the next couple of weeks. So that's kind of exciting. That's super fun. We got a new platform and some new content. There will be another book coming out. It's probably a couple years out, but I am working on a 3rd book that'll be specifically about emotional eating, and that's kind of exciting. And then I've got some other stuff in the work. I'm doing some research next year, and so I'll be letting people know about that probably in a couple of years also. That seems like really like geologic. Like I've got some stuff coming out in 2 years, but that's kind of that's kind of how it works.
Sounds awesome. I am so looking forward to reading that book, and I think it is a really good job. The amount of work you're doing in this area is so important, and I think it is so underrated. So it's
Thanks so much.
Awesome. Where can people find you? Is there any place that you want people to look into your things?
Yeah, Instagram is probably the best place to catch me. Joshua Hillis is so at Joshua Hillis. I don't normally go by my full name, but that's the only Instagram handle I could get. So Instagram's a cool place to catch me. I've got a bunch of articles at gmb.io. So GMB Fitness is like, that's where most of my newer articles are. And then my blog, joshhillis.com, has about 1,000 articles. So there's that too.
All right. You have a great day, and I hope to see you soon.